Right, everybody, it is time to start. Good day to everyone, and let's get going with IBT Online's Webinar Wednesday. The Go Global webinar series continues, and today we're talking about how to sell online in Europe and be GDPR compliant. So, General Data Protection Regulation compliant. Welcome and thank you for joining us from wherever you may be seated today. And I see today's attendees include the US, Europe, as well as the Middle East. So welcome, another truly online global webinar. Also, to those of you who will be listening to this on demand, as these webinars are recorded and they are kept for demand when you want to listen to them. So wherever you are, whatever time of day it is, you are very welcome. My name is John Worthington. I'm CEO here at IBT Online, and I'm host for you today. I have the huge pleasure of introducing our Go Global webinar series. And as I said, today it's all about how to sell online in Europe and be GDPR compliant. We're passionate about our Go Global webinar series. It's all about knowledge and understanding in this fast-moving and ever-changing online and international world. There's lots to learn and lots to keep up to date with. And today's subject, selling online in Europe with GDPR compliance, is a great example. The European Union General Data Protection Regulation, which has and is fundamentally reshaping the way in which data is handled across every sector, from healthcare to banking and beyond. It was enforced on the 25th of May of this year, and organizations that are not compliant are now facing heavy regulatory fines. The regulations are designed to do three things. Number one, harmonize data privacy laws across Europe. Number two, protect and empower all EU citizens' data privacy. And number three, reshape the way organizations across the region approach data privacy. Now, before we get going, as we always do, there's a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of you who are returnees, you know what to expect. For those of you who are coming to our webinars for the first time, do know that this webinar is one in our Go Global webinar series. It's all about helping you grow your sales, your brands and your businesses globally, but of course, with respect to the regulatory environments. The Go Global webinar series is now over 4 years old. Yeah, indeed, we have a huge catalog now of recorded webinars, subject to you going on demand and looking for them at www.ibt.onl/US/resources. Just go check it out and you can find the backlog there covering many, many markets and many, many routes to markets. Future webinars, we've got a number of webinars coming up in the future. We plan generally 3 months ahead, and you're welcome to go and check those out and join us. Today's webinar will be approximately 45 minutes, a brief introduction for myself before I hand over to Susanna, our master of the webinar series. There will be 3 polls today, so please be ready to participate. Your input is welcome and much appreciated. There will be time for questions at the end, so that little box that you see called questions on the right hand of your screen, click it and start submitting your questions. They are very welcome as well. There's also a chat box if you'd like to. And we are excited to move on with a survey at the end of this webinar today. This will enable you to get even more value from the webinar. So please know as well that we'll be emailing you a link to the webinar as it is recorded after this has been curated by our back office. And this will be in your email inbox on Friday. So now kick back, settle back, and enjoy today's webinar as we move on with selling online in Europe with GDPR compliance. So I'm proud to be joined by my co-presenters today. Susanna Hardy is in the middle, Chief Content Officer at IBT Online. In that capacity, Susanna has taken leadership for this successful online global webinar series. Susanna is responsible for all of our digital media and multi-channel publications and brings together and curates a huge wealth of international online research and knowledge that is then made available to you on our website and social media channels. So please don't hesitate to take advantage of that. Do go check out our IBT Online white papers, our ebooks, our infographics and videos, and they're all available to you. And today's GDPR is an example. Susanna has spent her career working for international business, that is over in New York, as well as in France, Germany, and the UK. And Susanna speaks German, French, Dutch, and English, which is kind of relevant and useful for today. Isabel Zurhausen on our left, one of IBT Online's marketing managers responsible for content localization, SEO, including keyword research and social media marketing, amongst many other digital tasks. Bella is a web-savvy millennial, a German native, and therefore, of course, speaks German as well as English, Spanish, and French. Bella has an impressive knowledge of languages, coupled with a background in business administration and management, making a perfect team member to help companies get online in Europe. Alex, on the right of your screen, is another of the IBT Online Millennial Tribe, one of our digital natives with online marketing manager responsibilities. Alex has a background in digital marketing and is responsible for social media programs, as well as content for international websites, and manages traffic volumes and engagement to achieve sales growth for our clients. Now, 2 or 3 words about IBT Online before I hand over. IBT Online, we are a private company. We are a US and a European company. IBT stands for International Business and Technologies. They're all online. We've been in business since 2002, helping exporters. That's over 16 years. And we're proud to have over 400 corporates that we work with, delivering 1,000 online global programs. An online global program is a website in Germany, social media in France, and search engine optimization in Italy, to give these European examples. We have over 18 US state programs, and we're very proud to have won a number of awards for the online global program. So there we go. IBT Online, we understand the challenges faced by companies going global, and GDPR and Europe is therefore the subject of today. And I have great pride and pleasure in handing over to Susanna. Susanna, are you with me?
Thank you very much, John, for the introduction, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about GDPR, selling online in Europe, and how to be GDPR compliant. So I've divided the webinar today into 5 categories. We're going to just take a very quick overview of Europe online, the major big facts and figures, just to give some background to our discussion. Then we're going to drill down and focus on some of the major markets, and Bella presenting on Germany, and Alex on the UK, and myself on France, the big 3 markets of Europe. And then we're going to break that out and say, what is it about European websites? How do they differ? What makes them specific? And then the 4th part is really just drilling down again into the GDPR compliance and the essential things that we feel you have to have right from the very start in terms of GDPR. Rounding off with case studies, best practices, and we have left a few minutes for your questions, and we're looking forward to that too. So without further ado, let's give a quick overview on Europe facts and figures. So I thought what I'd do starting off was just to give you sort of when we're talking about Europe, are we talking about Europe, the EU, and what is all this? So just defining it at the moment as the European Union, that's 28 different countries. Britain is still part of the EU at the moment, so 28 different countries, a combined economy of $17 trillion at last count. It's a lot of people. It's over 500 million people here. And in terms of internet penetration rate, there's over 80% penetration rate, nearly 90%. So above 430 million internet users. So a lot of a big internet space, a very large internet space, many of them already shopping online as well. So that's sort of the big picture on Europe. Let's just compare it. If I compare it a little bit in terms of the EU to the USA, you're going to see that in terms of economy, it's not too dissimilar. 17 versus the 19. I know these are trillions, but still, these are the 2 largest trading blocks, a single trading blocks like that. And then, but in terms of population, the EU quite significantly larger. For number of population, and indeed in terms of number of e-shoppers. So let's look on now and see about Europe online. How does that compare, and how does that look in terms of the USA? Europe online is actually a very interesting space. We said that the European Union is slightly smaller in terms of GDP, but if we look at the internet side, it's actually larger. And that's not just because of the penetration rate, but obviously also because we have a more population. In 2018, well over half of the world's population is online. Nearly 250 million new users came on stream in 2018 alone. And now Europe, as I said, the internet has grown and continues to grow in terms of penetration rate. It was up 6%. That means 37 million new users came on stream this year. So another sort of huge number of people. In terms of active social media users, that was also up about 8%. So that means another 32 million active social media users in Europe. Now, what are they all doing? Well, you can see that over half of them are very active on social media. Just in terms of, again, this is very broad brush, but in terms of EU e-commerce, online sales in the EU are about 360 billion, just a bit larger than the $340 billion registered in the USA. That's just very much B2C numbers. The B2B numbers are harder to actually pin down and get consistently. But I mean, most people seem to think it's between 2 and 3 times the size of the B2C. So B2B, business to business, is about 2 or 3 times the size of the B2C markets. In Europe, we're still seeing strong growths of e-commerce. Many countries are still in double-digit growths across Europe. You can see from the pie chart, though, that there are 3 dominant countries. The UK, Germany, and France combined is about nearly 70% of all European e-commerce. So those are the 3 countries we're really going to be sticking to and looking at the moment. I mentioned B2B, and as I said, it is a hard space to really get concrete numbers on. We have done other webinars on this specifically. We can, if you're interested, we can show you those assets. But just keep in mind, pretty well 3/4 of B2B buyers say that they look on the web before purchasing, and about 80% of EU businesses now have their own websites, and many of them are active on social media.
Wow, Susanna, thank you so much. That's very interesting, which just segue into, please, everybody, it's time for the first poll. I'm about to launch it, so please grab your mice, share with us, and here we go. Tell us about it. Where are you at? Are you currently doing business in Europe? If so, how about it? Please let us know. Yes, are you doing this in market partner and online, via distributors and in market partners, only online? Thinking about it, or how about no? I'm going to give you some feedback. Today we have amongst us over 30% that are saying no, and there's another 30% that are saying yes via in-market partners, and some 20% are saying yes via distributors, and there's another 10% thinking about it. That is very interesting. This information is all being recorded and will be with you on Friday when you want to check out the details yourself. So look, thank you so much. So there's a lot of people yes and a lot of people no. Susanna, back to you.
Thank you very much. We're going to drill down now in terms of the major markets and look at some of the, and focus in on some of the major markets. I would really like Bella to talk about Germany. Bella, are you there to talk about Germany?
Hi, yes, I'm there. So hi, everybody. It's great to speak to you today. And so starting with Germany, we can say that Germany is a global power. So when going global, size matters, and Germany is large by all standards. It has Europe's largest population with 82 million inhabitants, which is equivalent to a fourth of the USA, or to say it in another way, the 3 largest US states combined. So if you combine California, Texas, and Florida, you would get the size of Germany. In terms of the GDP, Germany is also Europe's largest country with a huge amount. So Germany is about $1 trillion above the number 2. Also, Germany is the 4th largest economy worldwide, ranked by GDP. And if you put that in a perspective, it is equivalent to 3 times the size of the whole Russian Federation and about 1.5 times of India. So to sum it up, Germany is a manufacturing powerhouse. You can see this by its positive trade balance year after year. Just as an example, in 2018, Germany exports, the exports are estimated to be $1.6 trillion. So to compare this to the US estimates exports this year are about $1.7 billion. So you can basically say that Germany exports as much as the whole USA. So this brings us to the online world of Germany. As you can see here, Germany has the largest internet population in Europe with 75 million internet users. And if you look at where German language internet sites are frequently accessed from, we even get a bigger sphere. So German websites are visited by a lot of other countries where many people speak German as first or as second language. As you can see on the slide, German is also spoken by Austria or Switzerland, or many people in Poland and Czech Republic speak German as second language. So through this sphere of influence, your German website can reach about 100 million people. So that's a lot. Yeah, and talking about Germany online, social media cannot be forgotten, of course. So over 85% of all adult Germans are online, but only half of them use social media channels. So this is far fewer than other European countries, according to a recent study of the German public television companies ARD and ZDF. So in general, social media usage in Germany is lower than most of the other EU countries, and Germany has been cautious to adopt new social media platforms, but we have to say it is growing consistently, and it should be definitely a part of any exporter strategy. Yeah, now I want to come to the single channels. So Facebook is still the number one by a long reach. 33% of all Germans use Facebook at least once per week, but most of them daily. So when we are looking at strategies for our clients in Germany, we need to think about using Facebook for sure. Yeah, and speaking about social media channels in general, there are some big differences when you want to reach Germans compared to, let's say, the US or compared to UK audiences. So, for example, Germans often use, or German businesses often use Google+. This is much more popular in Germany than in the US, for instance. And on the other hand, Twitter is not a strong platform in Germany. One reason for this could be the limitation of characters in Twitter, so compared to the length of the German words, which are really long usually. And another reason could be that Germans don't consider it too serious enough to make the business in Twitter. So Germans like quite a lot of content and not something which is too short and snappy, but rather something that has more substance. Also, another platform I would like to introduce to you is the platform Xing. It is like a German version of LinkedIn and is mainly used by German speakers. So 90% are German speakers using the platform. And finally, I wanted to highlight some of the major characteristics of German online behavior. So German businesses and customers tend to be more cautious and discreet online. They usually don't like to share personal information. So GDPR compliance is very important for the Germans. And even before the GDPR existed, the data protection laws in Germany were very strong compared to other countries. And another thing you should be aware of is that Germans often leave reviews. So make sure that you are ready to respond to them, because they definitely will leave you some reviews. So that brings us to another part of the online world, the great German websites. So yeah, the German is the third most common language on the internet, and Germans can find almost everything they need in their mother tongue. So they don't have any incentives to search in English. And when they do, it's usually just to find some specific information or because they are very persistent in search for a specific niche product, for instance. But these are just exceptions. The majority of Germans would search in German. So if you only have a US or UK page in English, your website will not pop up in the search results and you will be invisible for them. Also, you have to be very careful to find the right keywords for your German website. This is an essential part of search engine optimization, and even more important for the German itself. In part, this is because Germans love to invent new words. So the words are changing, and often there are several ways how to translate a product name, because Germans really like to create new words and like to combine existing ones. So if you have a translator who translates you a product name into German, he might suggest you a term which actually describes the product well, but it doesn't mean that Germans are actually searching for this word online. So that's why a keyword research is very important when you are building a website in German. As you can see, I included a little example for a really long compound word in German, which is called Massenkommunikationsdienstleistungsunternehmen. And translated to English, it's companies providing mass communication services. And these words actually exist in German. But this doesn't mean that Germans are actually searching for this term, because it's a really long word. And yeah, so you really need to make sure that the translated text is optimized afterwards. Yeah, and a final point which is important for websites is that Germans like to have a strong content. So don't be afraid to add text and explanations or even brochures to download, because your German prospects will check it all out. You can be sure about that. So, and this brings us to another big and great market in the EU. So Alex is going to present the UK.
Thanks, Bella, and hello, everybody. It's great to be here today to talk about the UK, and I will promise to keep Brexit talk down to a minimum. The UK is made up of 4 countries, so we've got England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, but the UK is also considered to be very London-centric. In fact, London and its surrounding areas account for about 30% of the entire UK population. So there are 66 million inhabitants in the UK, which makes it the 3rd largest country in the EU after Germany and France. But the UK punches way above its weight in terms of the English language, our happiest export over the last few hundred years. The table you can see on the right here gives you an idea of how many people in the world speak English at first, second, or even third language. So as you can see here, this means that over 2 billion people speak English worldwide. So how does this look online? If we'd like to move on to the next slide. So on average, the internet penetration rate in the EU is about 90%. In the UK, it's 95%. We also have a high penetration rate of social media, with 2 out of 3 of the population actively using social media on a very regular basis. So you can see from these stats, the UK is a very plugged in place with many people using the internet. Interestingly as well, the number of active social media users is still growing gradually at a rate of 5% every year. So this means that an additional 2 million people joined social media for the first time during 2018. The UK is also the undeniable European leader in time spent on the internet at nearly 6 hours a day, which includes an average of nearly 2 hours a day on social media. So this is about double the EU average. So clearly us Brits are all online for a lot of time searching and chatting. Okay, what's good as well is that we're also buying. In fact, us Brits have the highest e-commerce penetration rate in the world. Good news for shopkeepers and B2C companies doing business online in the UK. Nearly 80% of the UK population bought something online within the last month, and in fact, nearly 90% of us visited an online retail store. To put this in perspective, this figure for the USA is about 69%. And we Brits didn't just shop for trinkets either. We spent an average of over $2,000 per person last year, which is one of the highest average spends anywhere. That is for B2C e-commerce, of course, so for consumers. For B2B, the e-commerce figures are harder to pin down exactly as they get blurred between electronic data transmission and automatic invoicing. But people seem to all agree that the B2B side is about double the value of B2C. And there are a lot of studies showing that well over 2 out of 3 British companies are active online. So what does a great British website look like then? Well, clearly it is in English, but not just any English. Just like in Germany, your keyword research must be spot on. Susanna will talk about this a bit more later, but let's just say for now that American English is not the same as UK English. So your prospects may be using different words from you, and your search engine knows, of course, if you are sitting in the UK or not. So a UK website probably has a .co.uk at the end rather than a .com, because sitting in the UK, we go to google.co.uk. Here is an example of what different searches look like. My colleague in the US is obsessed with shoes, so this is the screenshot she sent me as an example. So as you can see, in Florida, if you type red shoes into Google, you get a long list of US retailers and pictures of American red shoes that are easy to buy if you live in Florida. In the UK, you type in red shoes into Google and you get a very different look. So to summarize, for a great UK website, you need to make sure it addresses your UK audience. Don't be fooled just because you think it's English. Not all English is the Queen's English. Now I'll hand you back to Susanna, who will discuss the French market.
Thank you, Alex. Hopefully, and discuss that in the French, in the Queen's English. So, a couple of big things about France and the market there. Obviously, it is a large country. It has the second highest population after Germany, with 67 million. GDP as well is the third in Europe and after the UK, but it's pretty well tied with the UK, to be honest. It's sixth in the world. I think what's really important and what people forget about France is just how large it is in terms of geography. It is by far the largest country in the EU. It's, again, just to give it a US comparison, it's slightly larger than the state of Texas. Paris also, again, it's a very capital city centric country. Paris is Europe's most populous capital region, urban region. And I guess the other thing I'd like to highlight just on this slide is that France is often used as a gateway, not only to sort of some neighboring countries like Belgium and Luxembourg and Switzerland, Italy, Spain, but also to North Africa, West Africa, and the Mediterranean in general. So that's sort of, France is in a nutshell. Now, if we're looking at France online, similar to Germany and the UK, it has a very high penetration rate, not quite as high as the UK, but just about. 91% of French use the internet on a very regular basis. 58% are active on social media. What's interesting as well, they spend an average of 4 hours on the internet. That compares to UK 6 hours. But the French absolutely love YouTube. It's by far their biggest internet platform and one of the highest users of YouTube in Europe. Facebook is the largest social media platform, but all messaging platforms perform very well in France. So all the Facebook messengers and WhatsApps and anything like that, even Snapchat, is sort of semi-messaging platforms that work very well across Europe. E-commerce in France, again, just sort of giving you a snapshot on it. Overall, e-commerce and indeed even the web was quite slow to catch on in France, perhaps because they had an existing platform with something they had that was very Franco-French beforehand. So e-commerce, caught on slowly, but is now catching up very fast. It's one of the fastest growing across Europe, definitely in the double digits. You'll note, though, that average spend is about $1,000. That compares to the $2,000 that Alex was talking about in the UK. But in France, it is definitely growing at the double digits. Plus 12, between plus 9 and plus 12% for virtually all categories. Now, how can we look at sort of? I guess the last point to point out is that there's a lot of local champions. I noted on this slide, I've listed two of them as Au Bon Coin and Cdiscount, but there's a lot of very, very strong local contenders, both for B2C and B2B, that a French person would naturally gravitate to these platforms when looking on online buying. Great websites in France are obviously in French. The French are very committed to their French language. They do not particularly like to do cross-border buying. They're one of the laggards of that across Europe. So it's definitely in French. And I would say it probably has a good YouTube presence too. Why not take advantage of the French love of YouTube and just get right in there with your YouTube things? Add French references, French testimonials, and be sure to have strong social media presence. This is a country that is definitely pulling up on the social media. Now, let's talk a little bit about sort of European websites in general. We've really focused on the big 3 countries, but what is it about websites across Europe that make things differently? And I wanted just to share sort of this diagram with you. I think some of you have been on previous webinars, have seen it before, but I think it really encapsulates the reason also why today one needs websites. It's really, you know, in the past you had these sort of binomial relationships between customer and company, a one-to-one relationship. Customers were rarely talking about the individual company they used in any serious way. Today, things have changed very dramatically. Those relationships are multiple, they are complex, and most of all, they are customer-centric. So the customer sits at the center of the web, and it's your job as a company, and particularly as an exporter, to make sure that you can influence some of the dialogues going on between customer to customer, competitor partner, competitor customer, and customer partner. So just to try and influence that through social media and through your web. So that's where the web really comes in. It comes in on those arrows going from customer to customer. And to do that, you need to be customer-centric. So market-specific and customer-centric. But how do we get that? Well, let's go to basics and talk about how search engines work. Most of all, I think summing it up, search engines are localized. Bella and Alex both gave examples of German and UK websites. Looking at it from a German and UK perspective or a French perspective, in Germany, you would go on germany.de, google.de to look for something, not google.com. So Google in Germany is in German, obviously. Think of Google, by far the most dominant search engine in Europe. Think of Google as lots of country-specific Googles. Google, in fact, has 192 different search engines, each one for a different region. And that's really probably the best way to think, okay, if Google or the search engine is localized, then my website has to be localized too. Same thing really holds for social media. And here you have an example of keywords in social media that are used, because social media platforms, Facebook, for example, Facebook is in over 101 different languages, just like Google. It is client-specific. It is market-specific, client-focused. So here we have an example of different words for social media in Portuguese. If you, this is actually a company of ours, a client of ours who's active in the train business, who supplies the train sector, you know, it's very important that we get the right word for them in Brazil or in Portugal. If you're in Portugal, the word for train is comboio. 98% of Portuguese people searching for train would look for comboio. If you're in Brazil, 95% of people in Brazil are going to look for the word trem. So different Google, although it's the same search engine, it's a different Google. Google Portugal is not the same as Google Brazil. Different keywords, therefore different ad campaigns. So again, Google is localized. That means market-specific, client-focused. Social media is localized. That means market-specific and client-focused. I've summed up here the 10 biggest characteristics that we have for website localization. We're not going to go through them obviously today. We're really focusing on the last one, regulatory requirements. But you'll note that of these 10, only one is about local language and adapting it fully to local language. The other aspects, hosting, design, navigation, domain names, are all very much specific to individual markets. So we're going to be really focusing on the regulatory requirements, but I would also just highlight again, we have a lot of webinars focused on website localization if you want to delve into that a bit more.
Susanna, thank you so much. That was great. I'd like to say, please, it's time for poll number 2. I'm about to launch the second poll. So here we go. Do you have localized websites for your export markets? Now, Susanna's been outlining the case there, and so has Bella and Alex, and the reasoning behind it. What about yourselves? How are you doing? So I'm getting 25% that are saying yes for all export markets. Some 40%, 45% to say yes, but only for a few, and a solid 33% are thinking about it. And no. So I would say to you, please, well, there you go. I hope today we've been adding to your knowledge and understanding of the reasons behind it and how you too can leverage the internet today to be successful online in these markets. Now, I'm going to close this one and thank you for submitting your replies and hand this back to Susanna. Susanna.
Thank you. That's interesting, actually. Look, we're going to now just zoom in on the GDPR must-haves. So what are the keys to GDPR, and where are we on the GDPR scale? Well, GDPR, in fact, has a pretty long history. I mean, the web was founded about 30 years ago, but it was founded on the premise of data sharing, but also of transparency and accountability. But at that time, it was unregulated. Europe has always taken a driving seat in terms of regulation and saying that, yes, we have to have data sharing, yes, we have to have transparency, but we also need accountability. And accountability means some form of regulation. So we've had various historic attempts, shall we say, to add some kind of regulation that includes safe harbor, the 1995 EU Data Protection Act, cookies, and so on, that some of you might already know. All of these now have been, in a sense, superseded in Europe by the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. In essence, the GDPR really gets back to basics, basically saying that the underlying premise is that the individual owns his or her own data. So if you sign up for the use of an app, you tick a box for those T and C's that nobody ever reads, then the app can use that data. That's okay, but then the pendulum has swung very far in the direction of corporations. And there's a feeling of sort of abuse and mistrust. There's a great internet saying, which is that if the product is free to download, then you are the product. And GDPR, in a sense, is a reaction to that. The question ultimately is, who owns your data? Who owns your online persona? And today with GDPR, that online persona is seen as an asset that has a growing valuation. Companies buy and sell those assets, marketeers, political organizations, governments. But in a sense, that asset is ultimately yours. Shouldn't you have a say in it? So that's where GDPR comes in. In a way, GDPR marks the end of 30 years of Wild West websites. So here you are. There's the major points about GDPR is that it gives EU citizens control over their own data. It explains what rights an EU citizen has and extends those rights over their personal data. There are quite serious sanctions in case of non-compliance. These are the first time really that a regulator has had teeth to enforce that regulation. And it's applicable to any European anywhere. So it's applicable outside the US, outside the EU, including in the USA, and I mean anywhere in the world. So it has a global reach. Looking at here, you see again another a heavy slide. I apologize for all this. When I talked about the key aspects of giving applicable outside the EU, giving that global reach, does GDPR really apply to US companies? Yes, it does, very clearly. GDPR is about the processing of personal data of EU data subjects, no matter where that EU data subject is. It's processing by any company inside or outside the EU that offer to sell or transact of goods and services to EU citizens, no matter where they are. It applies also, by the way, to employees that you may have who may be European. So really, it does have that global reach. And I would add as well that that GDPR is something that's being very closely watched by other countries. So it's being watched very closely by Canada, by Japan, by Australia, by other countries looking to apply a similar regulation for their own citizens. So getting down to some of the big questions that we have very frequently asked by our international clients, one of the key parts is the transfer of data. Can I transfer data outside the EU? So if, for example, I have clients in the EU, can I be looking at them when I sit in Abu Dhabi, or when I sit in Texas, or when I sit in the Philippines? Can I look at that? And the answer is a clear no, unless you are fully GDPR compliant. So unless you, for example, Mexican company that has European clients, unless you have an understanding of GDPR and have put in place some parts of GDPR, you will not be compliant and you will not have the correct ability to transfer data. That includes data from your distributors. One of the major aspects and characteristics of GDPR is this notion of a controller or a processor. And you have to, one of the first steps you have to know and take is to know whether you are a controller or a processor of data. As the words suggest, a controller is a company or an entity that decides what we're doing and how we're going to process data. So for example, if you are the company that sells products into Europe, you are a controller of data. A processor is anyone that basically takes your decision making, who obeys what you ask. So it's, for example, your distributor in Europe, or an agent, or it could even be a cloud service provider. And GDPR demands that there is a clear recognition and a clear understanding of who does what, a controller or a processor, and that there's an understanding between the two that they will both be compliant. Now, what about some first steps towards GDPR compliance? I've listed here the top steps that we would go through looking towards GDPR compliant. The first is really defining that role of controller versus processor. Who is a processor? Who is a controller within your organization and amongst your distributors, amongst your partners? You need to have a clear definition of that, and you need to have a written understanding between each one of them. Then you need to register the processing activities. Are they collecting data? If so, how are they storing it? Where are they putting it? Privacy policy has to be clearly stated, updated, put out there, integrated, and enforced in all aspects of your company. That includes mapping all the data that you have about anybody. So you have to know, for a European subject, where does that data go? And data has an amazing ability to sort of seep through a company. So you might say, well, we all have it in our sales Excel spreadsheets, or our sales CRM. But if you're acting with European companies, then you probably have it somewhere else too, maybe in an after sales, or in finance department, or in a warranty, a guarantee scheme, or amongst your distributors. So all of that has to be mapped out and figured out and seen whether it's secure. Part of that security is to make sure that you have a clear data breach scenario, that if in the event of a data breach, you know who to call and what to do. And that brings me up to something else, the appointment of a data protection officer, or at the very least, someone responsible within your company for GDPR. So depending on your size, depending on the activity, you either have to have a data protection officer registered with the internet authorities of the country, or at the very least, a responsible officer within your company in case of data breach.
Susanna, thank you for that. It is time for poll number 3. Wow, that's a list, and that is an impressive list to be on top of and manage. So therefore, let's go to poll number 3, please. I'm launching the third and final poll, and it says, are your websites digitally compliant? So attendees today, please, how are you feeling about this? Yes, our home website and major export markets, yes, but only a home site. But we're number 3, we are aware of the problems, not sure, and no. Well, let me give you some feedback. What do we have? The highest one we have is no, but we are aware of the problems. There you go. That's got a full 35%. and 20% are saying yes, our home website and major export website. So that's well done, you guys, and not only but our home website. And there's a good number. There's a 30% that are saying not sure, and a good 10%, 11% saying no. Well, we hope that we're helping today. We hope that we're providing useful information, at least it's the steps to begin. And I'm going to hand back to Susanna, and thank you for contributing to this poll. Susanna, over to you.
Thanks. We wanted to conclude with some case studies and best practices to give you some ideas of things. Looking at the amount of content we've had to go through, we've had to sort of curate this to a bit of an essence of it, as it were. But what I would like to do is to really encourage you to visit on our website. If you go IBT Online and look at some of the client success stories, you'll see a whole series of videos and testimonials from clients talking through their experience of what it meant to have localized websites, to be GDPR compliant, to go online and have international websites, and to use us for their social media marketing as well. So we're really going to focus on just the one specific case study, but again, please do visit our website and go into client success stories and check out some of those videos. I'm sure you'll find some companies that resonate strongly with you and that you identify with. So in the meantime, I just want to pass back to Bella to talk about a company that she looks after.
Sure. Let me talk about Bullman Products. So Bullman is a great example of a company using localized websites to grow their exports. Bullman is a US privately held company that sells internationally via their distributors. And they sell lots of different verticals. So for instance, to schools, retail packaging, or florists, and many more. So they could have several distributors in one market. The Bullman management wanted to make sure they were in charge of their own brands and therefore of their international online presence, which means getting local websites. The Bullman management also wanted to provide a sales tool for their distributors, so the websites were complement the distributors and generate leads for the distributors across all their export markets. So what we did, first we built them websites for their most important markets in Europe. So we started with Germany and the UK, which brings us to the next slide. So as you can see, afterwards we helped Bullman to get an online presence in other European markets like Spain and also beyond Europe to other key export markets. And when the GDPR came up in May this year, we worked with Bullman to make sure all their European websites were compliant. This meant working with a company to review where and how the data was collected and also kept for all their markets. And helping Bullman for the GDPR included everything from opt-in thick boxes to privacy policy and data breach scenarios. So now they are fully compliant with GDPR. So, and in that case, I hand back to Susanna.
Thank you, Bella. In the interest of time, we wanted also just to highlight, again, part of our services in terms of GDPR Solutions. And again, this will give you some idea of what it means to have compliant websites. So not just in terms of content management systems that are good, but encrypted data, data permission clauses, privacy and cookie policies, eventually even having geolocation so that they do not go onto your US websites or your other country websites, so that you can really focus in on Europeans onto their European websites. And then obviously privacy policies, controller processor agreements, and then finally these supervisory registrations. So it's a lot that goes into GDPR solutions and GDPR compliance for websites. And again, if you want full details on that, or if we can be of any help, you can find that on our website. I hope I've left a little bit of time for questions. You have a large selection here of companies that we've worked with, but I hope there's also some time for you for asking questions today. John, is there any questions come in?
Yep, I've got a bunch of questions. I do indeed, but with regards to the time, we are 5 minutes over. But so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the top three. A quick question then for each of you. How about that? So I'm going to start off with Bella. Bella, here it's a US company. They say they're doing business in Germany. So great, that's your wheelhouse, and it's all about distributors. Tell us, are there extra regulations for German website? Is that true?
Oh, that's a good question, John. And I think it's also an important question to know if you want to build a German website. So basically, as we mentioned today, your website needs to be GDPR compliant for sure. But Germany also has some specific laws which are only in Germany. So, for example, you have to create a page called Impressum. And this means basically the authorship of the website, and you have to include the contact details of the website owner in this section. And every commercial website owner in Germany is legally obligated to have such a page. So you really have to do this in Germany. And yeah, besides the Impressum and the data protection laws, we also have very strict copyright laws in Germany. So if you include any pictures or videos in your website, you really have to make sure that you have the rights on these to provide them on your website. So yeah, that's basically it.
Bella, thanks. I'm going to jump quickly to Alex. Alex, Drea, a US attendee today, is saying GDPR. I guess that was the beginning comment you made. So will GDPR be affected by Brexit? How about that?
Well, the answer to that appears to be no. Although Brexit terms seem to be changing all the time, but to date there has been no mention of altering or not adhering to EU regulations on the internet. And certainly the UK Internet Supervisory Authority, otherwise known as the ICO, is saying that GDPR is here to stay. So yeah, no effect on GDPR when it comes down to Brexit.
Thank you, Alex. And finally, Susanna, I've taken one more question, and this one is from Jim saying, for GDPR compliant websites that you offer, is there any European market, which markets do you recommend to start with? There you go, starting.
I think there's sort of two parts to that question. The first is which markets should you start in Europe, which are clearly the markets where you expect to have, let me put it this way, clients typically begin with the markets where they expect to have the highest and fastest returns. So the markets that are your most established. There are, however, some clients who also say, well, I'm going to try and use a website to try out that market, or to test the water in that market. So that's the other angle that you could go for. If you just want to say, well, I'm going to use the website just to market research, then I can pick markets that I'm not in already and see if that product goes or not. But if I have a strong market already, then using a localized website as an online tool, as a sales tool, is a fantastic idea. The GDPR is effective for all of Europe and really seeps into all aspects of your company transactions in Europe. Getting one GDPR website is already quite an exercise and a great exercise to do for your whole company. Adding additional websites once you are compliant is not so hard. So pick your strongest one, or pick the one that you really want to go for in Europe, that you've decided that's the market for me. And then make sure you're GDPR compliant in that market. And then you can easily roll out your other markets, just as, for example, the example that Bella gave with Bullman. Just once you have the first ones, it's easy then to roll out the next ones.
Susanna, thank you. That makes total sense. Jim, I hope that helps you. We're going to have to close. We are running out of time, but this is a thank you. We will now bring you that survey. So please give us just one more minute, a quick survey on the selling online in Europe with GDPR compliance. That input then will be fed back to you, because on Friday you will get this in your inbox. We want to thank you for participating today. We hope that you have enjoyed today's webinar. Information from Bella, from Susanna, from Alex. We hope that you found that information useful and that you can go and this will help you in your GDPR and European compliance challenges. At IBT Online, we do understand these challenges, and we are indeed here to help you. We have solutions that we can work with you all about growing your exports in Europe, your sales, brand, and business. Now, on Friday, as I said, you'll get this recording, so it is over to me now simply to say thank you to Susanna. Thank you, Bella and Alex. It's a great job done, really useful. And from all of us attendees and listeners, we really appreciated your input and work there. Now let's all go. Let's close down the webinar. Let's go and sell more online in Europe. Let's do so safely, securely, and successfully with GDPR compliance. Thank you very much indeed. I'm shutting the webinar down now.